Yeah, it's better that we arrest him before he makes the complaint, then it can't be retaliation.
You're right. Let's get this before he tries to pull the race car.
What am I being arrested for?
I've done anything wrong.
5 counts of felony theft. You're coming with us. Turn around.
This is because I complained about the racism, isn't it? You can't.
21-7 subject.
West Linn, Oregon. Population 26,000. A quiet, affluent suburb just outside Portland, known for excellent schools, low crime rates, and tree-lined streets where neighbors wave to each other. It's the kind of place where people trust their police department without question. But on February 10th, 2020, that trust shattered into a million pieces. The Oregonian newspaper published an explosive investigation that revealed something shocking. The town's former police chief had orchestrated the arrest of an innocent black man as a personal favor to his fishing buddy. Within 48 hours, the story went viral, generating over 2.5 million views. It sparked community outrage, forced a $600,000 settlement, led to multiple firings, and ultimately resulted in 2 law enforcement officers losing their police certifications permanently for life. But here's what makes this case truly extraordinary. Every step of the conspiracy was documented in text messages, police reports, and recorded phone calls. The perpetrators left a digital paper trail so damning that even they couldn't deny what they'd done. This is the real story of Michael Fesser, a man who reported racism at work and found himself targeted by a corrupt police chief who valued friendship over justice. Michael Fesser was 48 years old in 2017, a black man living in Portland, Oregon, trying to make an honest living. He'd worked at A&B Towing and Recovery since 2004, over 13 years with the same company. Those who knew him described Fesser as a hard worker, reliable, someone who showed up on time and did his job without complaint. He had no criminal record, no history of violence, nothing that would suggest he was anything other than a regular guy trying to support himself. Fesser worked in the towing industry, which meant long hours, difficult customers, and sometimes dangerous situations on Portland's streets. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady, and Fesser had built a reputation as someone you could count on. But there was a problem. A problem that had been growing for years. His boss, Eric Benson, the owner of A&B Towing, had a habit of making racist comments. Not subtle microaggressions, but blatant in-your-face racism. The kind that made Fesser's stomach turn every time he came to work. By 2016, Fesser had had enough. He'd complained to Benson multiple times about the racist remarks, the hostile work environment, the way he was treated differently than his white coworkers. And Eric Benson knew exactly what that meant. If Fesser filed a formal discrimination complaint, it could cost Benson hundreds of thousands of dollars in a lawsuit. So Benson decided to do something about it, something that would destroy Fesser's credibility before he ever had the chance to sue. Eric Benson wasn't just a towing company owner. He was a West Linn resident, well-connected in the small community, and most importantly, he was personal friends with the town's police chief, Timeus. They were fishing buddies, the kind of friends who spent weekends together on Oregon's rivers, swapping stories and building the kind of relationship where favors get asked and granted. Police Chief Timeus had led the West Linn Police Department for years. To the community, he was a respected figure, a man in uniform who represented law and order. But behind the badge, Timeus had a history of questionable judgment. In May 2017, just months after the Fesser incident, 2 of his own officers reported that Timeus appeared drunk as he left a local restaurant. There were whispers about his conduct, about his leadership, about decisions that put loyalty to friends above loyalty to the law. When Eric Benson came to Timeus with a problem in early 2017, Timeus didn't hesitate. His friend needed help, and Timeus had the power to provide it. Enter Detective Tony Reeves, the man who would lead the investigation against Fesser. Reeves was a West Linn detective, ambitious, eager to please his superiors, and apparently unconcerned about little details like jurisdiction, evidence, or constitutional rights. Reeves would later be promoted to sergeant, a reward that came just months before his entire world collapsed. And finally, there was Detective Mike Stradley, who assisted in the investigation. Stradley had a history with Fesser that nobody initially knew about. Years earlier, when Stradley was a Portland police officer and Fesser was a young man, Stradley had decided that Fesser was just a bad guy who deserved to go to jail. That personal bias would poison the investigation from the start. These were the players: a racist business owner, a corrupt police chief, and 2 detectives willing to abuse their power to make their boss happy. Late 2016. Michael Fesser was reaching his breaking point at A&B Towing. The racist comments from Eric Benson weren't stopping. If anything, they were getting worse. Fesser complained multiple times, documenting the harassment, making it clear that the work environment was hostile and discriminatory. He even consulted with an attorney about his options. That attorney sent a letter to Fesser outlining his legal rights and the possibility of filing a formal discrimination complaint. complaint. It was a private, confidential attorney-client communication, the kind of letter that's protected by one of the most sacred principles in American law. Fesser kept that letter in his car, a reminder that he had options, that he didn't have to tolerate the abuse. But Eric Benson could feel the walls closing in. He knew Fesser was preparing to sue. He knew a discrimination lawsuit could destroy his business reputation and cost him everything. So sometime in late 2016, Benson made a decision. He would strike first. He would accuse Fesser of a crime, get him arrested, get him fired, and destroy his credibility before Fesser ever had the chance to file that lawsuit. And Benson knew exactly who to call for help. His good friend, Police Chief Terry Timeus. The plan was set in motion with a simple conversation between friends, probably over beers after a fishing trip. Benson told Timeus that he suspected his employee, Michael Fesser, was stealing money from the towing company's auction proceeds. Small amounts, he claimed, just a few $100s here and there, but theft nonetheless. Did Benson have any evidence? No. Were there missing funds that could be documented? Not really. Was there any proof whatsoever that Fesser had committed a crime? Absolutely not. But Benson had something more powerful than evidence. He had a friend with a badge. February 2017, Police Chief Terry Timeus did something highly unusual. He contacted the Portland Police Bureau and asked them to investigate Michael Fesser for theft from A&B Towing. There was just one small problem. A&B Towing was located in Portland, which meant it was Portland's jurisdiction, not West Linn's. Portland Police reviewed the complaint and made a professional decision. They declined the case. Why? Because the alleged theft amounts were tiny, just a few $100s. Because there was no actual evidence of any crime. Because Fesser had worked for the company for over a decade with no prior issues. And because something about the whole situation smelled wrong. A smart, ethical law enforcement agency looks at a case like this and sees what it really is. A civil employment dispute, not a criminal matter. But Terry Timeus wasn't going to let a little thing like jurisdiction, evidence, or professional standards stop him. If Portland wouldn't investigate his friend's employee, West Linn would. Timeus assigned the case to Detective Tony Reeves with clear instructions: build a criminal case against Michael Fesser. Reeves got to work immediately, and he brought in Detective Mike Stradley to help. Neither of them seemed concerned that they were investigating a crime that allegedly occurred entirely outside their jurisdiction. Neither of them seemed bothered by the complete lack of evidence. And neither of them questioned why their police chief was personally directing an investigation into a Portland resident at the request of his personal friend. What they did instead was start surveillance on Michael Fesser, illegal surveillance, the kind that would later be condemned by prosecutors and judges alike. Between February 14th and February 25th, 2017, Detective Tony Reeves conducted what can only be described as a sham investigation. He used an audio surveillance app called Swan View to record Fesser at work without his knowledge or consent. That's illegal in Oregon, a two-party consent state where you can't secretly record someone's conversations. But Reeves didn't care about the law. He was too busy texting with Eric Benson. Over those 11 days, Reeves and Benson exchanged more than 40 pages of text messages. These weren't professional law enforcement communications. These were buddy conversations between two men conspiring to destroy a third. Eric Benson sent message after message filled with racist slurs. He called Fesser the N-word. He used homophobic slurs. He sent sexist, crude, degrading messages about Fesser and others. Any ethical law enforcement officer receiving messages like that would immediately recognize a massive red flag. A witness using racist language about the suspect? That's evidence of bias. That's evidence that the accusations might be motivated by discrimination rather than actual criminal conduct. That's the kind of evidence that destroys a case before it even gets to trial. But Detective Reeves didn't push back. He didn't tell Benson to stop. He didn't document the racist messages as evidence of Benson's credibility problems. Instead, Reeves encouraged him. He sent his own crude, unprofessional messages back. He told Benson not to worry, that they wouldn't let Fesser play the race card to escape justice. And then Reeves sent the message that would later become the smoking gun of the entire case. It's better that we arrest him before he makes the complaint of race discrimination. Then it can't be retaliation. Read that again. A police detective, a sworn law enforcement officer, was explicitly strategizing about how to arrest a man before he could file a discrimination complaint, specifically to make it look like it wasn't retaliation. That's not police work. That's conspiracy. That's corruption. That's a law enforcement officer weaponizing his badge to help a friend silence a victim of racism. February 25th, 2017. Michael Fesser arrived at work at A&B Towing just like he had thousands of times before. He had no idea that West Linn Police had been surveilling him. He had no idea that Detective Reeves had already prepared an arrest warrant. He had no idea that in a few hours his entire life would be destroyed. That morning, West Linn Police coordinated with Portland Police to make the arrest. Since A&B Towing was in Portland's jurisdiction, West Linn couldn't just show up and start making arrests without Portland's cooperation. So they fed Portland officers the story. Suspect in a felony theft case, 5 counts, employee stealing from his employer, need assistance with arrest. Portland officers, trusting their colleagues from West Linn, agreed to help. Michael Fesser was at work when the police arrived. Officers approached him and told him he was under arrest for 5 counts of felony theft. Fesser was stunned. Theft? What theft? He'd never stolen anything from A&B Towing. He'd worked there faithfully for 13 years. This had to be a mistake. But it wasn't a mistake. It was a plan. Officers handcuffed Fesser in front of his co-workers. The humiliation was immediate and public. Everyone at the towing company watched as Fesser was led away in handcuffs, accused of being a thief, a criminal, someone who'd betrayed his employer's trust. Eric Benson watched it happen, probably smiling. His problem employee was being removed, and his police chief friend had delivered exactly what he'd asked for, but the violation didn't stop with the arrest. Police searched Fesser's car and seized his personal belongings. They took his cell phone. They took documents related to his own personal business. And then they found something that made this case go from bad to absolutely outrageous. They found the private letter from Fesser's attorney. The letter that outlined Fesser's legal rights regarding the discrimination he'd experienced at A&B Towing, the letter that was protected by attorney-client privilege, one of the most fundamental rights in the American legal system. Detective Reeves seized that letter. And then, in a move so brazen that it would later be called shocking by prosecutors, Reeves gave that private, privileged letter to Eric Benson. He handed evidence of Fesser's planned discrimination lawsuit directly to the man Fesser was planning to sue. That's not just unethical. That's potentially criminal. That's a violation so egregious that it alone could have ended Reeves's career. Michael Fesser was booked on 5 felony theft charges. Felonies. Serious crimes that carry prison time, that destroy your ability to get future employment, that mark you as a criminal for the rest of your life. He was fired from A&B Towing immediately. After 13 years of service, he was gone, labeled a thief. His reputation in ruins. In the community where he'd worked, people who'd known him for over a decade now looked at him with suspicion. Did you hear? Michael Fesser was arrested. 5 felonies. Can you believe it? He seemed like such a nice guy. Word spread fast. Fesser's name was destroyed. His ability to find new work in the towing industry, or any industry, was shattered. Who wants to hire someone facing 5 felony theft charges? But Fesser knew the truth. He hadn't stolen anything. This arrest wasn't about justice. It was about silencing him. It was retaliation for daring to complain about racism. So Fesser did what he had to do. He hired an attorney and prepared to fight. As his attorney began investigating the case, something became immediately clear. There was no evidence. None. The prosecution's case relied entirely on Eric Benson's accusations and some vague, unverifiable claims about missing auction money. There were no surveillance videos showing Fesser taking money, no financial records proving theft, no witnesses who saw him steal anything. Nothing. Just the word of a man who'd been making racist comments to his employee for years and who feared a discrimination lawsuit. Fesser's attorney started digging deeper. He subpoenaed phone records. He demanded discovery. He filed motions asking for every piece of evidence the police had gathered. And that's when the text messages emerged. The 40-plus pages of texts between Eric Benson and Detective Tony Reeves. The racist slurs, the crude jokes, the explicit strategy to arrest Fesser before he could file a discrimination complaint. When prosecutors saw those text messages, they knew the case was over. The Multnomah County District Attorney's Office reviewed the evidence against Michael Fesser and the newly discovered text messages. Their conclusion was swift and unambiguous. This case could not proceed. The racist messages from Eric Benson destroyed his credibility as a witness. The messages from Detective Reeves showed improper bias and suggested the investigation was motivated by retaliation rather than evidence. And the complete lack of any actual proof that Fesser had committed theft meant there was no case to prosecute. All 5 felony charges against Michael Fesser were dropped, dismissed. The prosecution filed paperwork explaining that the case was being abandoned because the complaining witness, Eric Benson, had displayed racial animus, and the investigation appeared tainted. Fesser was vindicated in the criminal system, but the damage was already done. He'd lost his job. His reputation had been destroyed. He'd spent months under the cloud of felony charges, unable to work, unable to move forward with his life. And the men who'd done this to him, Police Chief Terry Timeus, Detective Tony Reeves, Eric Benson, they were all still free, still going about their lives as if nothing had happened. But Michael Fesser wasn't going to let it end there. He filed a lawsuit against Eric Benson and A&B Towing for racial discrimination and wrongful termination. During the discovery process for that lawsuit, even more evidence emerged, more text messages, more documentation of the conspiracy, more proof that this had been a coordinated effort to destroy Fesser before he could expose the racism at A&B Towing. In 2018, Eric Benson and A&B Towing settled that lawsuit. They paid Michael Fesser $15,000. That settlement was an admission, without saying the words, that they knew exactly what they'd done. But Fesser wasn't finished. Because the lawsuit against his employer didn't address the bigger problem, the police officers who'd abused their power to make it all happen. On June 4th, 2018, Michael Fesser's attorney delivered a tort claim notice to the city of West Linn. This was the formal first step in suing the city for civil rights violations. The 10-page claim laid out everything: how Police Chief Terry Timeus had initiated an investigation as a personal favor to his friend, how Detective Tony Reeves had conducted illegal surveillance, how they'd exchanged racist text messages with Benson, how they'd violated attorney-client privilege, how they'd conspired to arrest Fesser before he could file a discrimination complaint. It was a devastating document, and it should have set off alarm bells throughout West Linn's city government. The mayor received a copy. The city manager received a copy. The new police chief, Terry Kruger, received a copy on his very first day on the job. And here's where the story takes another turn into institutional failure. Because what happened next shows how government entities often circle the wagons to protect themselves, even when the allegations are serious and credible. The new police chief, Terry Kruger, immediately recused himself from the case. Why? Because he was also personal friends with Eric Benson. Let that sink in. The old police chief was friends with Benson. The new police chief was friends with Benson. In a town of 26,000 people, the towing company owner somehow had both police chiefs in his pocket. But Kruger's recusal didn't lead to an outside investigation. Instead, the West Linn Police Department assigned an internal investigator to review the allegations. That investigator was Acting Lieutenant Otis Rollins, not a captain, not an outside agency. An acting lieutenant, someone of equal rank to the sergeant who'd conducted the investigation, was tasked with investigating his own colleague. And the scope of Rollins's investigation was described by the city manager herself as a cursory look to determine if an internal investigation was even warranted. Cursory. They received a claim alleging that their former police chief had conspired with officers to falsely arrest a black man as a racial retaliation favor for a friend, and they decided to give it a cursory look. Acting Lieutenant Rollins conducted what can only be described as one of the most inadequate investigations in modern law enforcement history. He interviewed Detective Tony Reeves for exactly 14 minutes. 14 minutes to address allegations of conspiracy, racial bias, illegal surveillance, violations of attorney-client privilege, and abuse of power. During that interview, Reeves admitted to using crude language in his messages with Benson. He admitted to advising Benson not to let Fesser play the race card. He admitted to seizing Fesser's cell phone and personal documents without properly booking them into evidence. But Rollins didn't push. He didn't dig deeper. He didn't ask the hard questions. And here's the shocking part. When Rollins conducted that interview, he hadn't even reviewed the 40 pages of text messages between Reeves and Benson yet. He interviewed the subject of an investigation about text messages he hadn't read. 2 days later, Rollins received the full text message records. He reviewed them and noted that they contained multiple messages from Reeves that were lewd, obscene, inappropriate, and unprofessional. Messages that clearly showed Reeves had been acting as Benson's buddy rather than an objective investigator. Messages that destroyed any claim that this was a legitimate criminal investigation. Did Rollins call Reeves back in for a follow-up interview? No. He decided he had enough information. The result of Rollins's investigation, Detective Tony Reeves was found to have violated 3 minor policies. He'd used discourteous and unprofessional language. He'd failed to properly book property. He'd failed to follow the procedure for releasing property. His punishment? A written reprimand. The lowest level of formal discipline a police officer can receive. Not a suspension, not a demotion, not termination. A written reprimand. For conspiring to falsely arrest a man in racial retaliation. The investigation didn't interview Michael Fesser, the victim. It didn't interview Eric Benson. It didn't interview former police chief Terry Timeus. It didn't address the illegal surveillance. It didn't address the violation of attorney-client privilege. It didn't address the explicit text message about arresting Fesser before he could file a discrimination complaint. It was a whitewash, a cover-up disguised as accountability. For 20 months, Michael Fesser's lawsuit against the city of West Linn moved through the court system. During that time, depositions depositions were taken, evidence was gathered. The full scope of the conspiracy became clearer and clearer. The city's insurance company and attorneys evaluated the case and came to an inescapable conclusion. If this goes to trial, the city will lose badly. Juries don't like racist text messages. Juries don't like police chiefs doing favors for friends. Juries don't like innocent men being arrested in retaliation. And juries in cases like this tend to award massive damages. So in early February 2020, the city council was advised in a closed executive session that a settlement had been negotiated. The city would pay Michael Fesser $600,000 to settle all claims and avoid a trial. On February 10th, 2020, the city council voted to approve the settlement. And on the same day, the Oregonian published a bombshell investigative article exposing the entire scandal. Reporter Maxine Bernstein had obtained court records, text messages, and documents that told the full story. Her article included the racist language from Benson's messages. It included Reeves's text about arresting Fesser before he could file a discrimination complaint. It included details about the illegal surveillance and the violation of attorney-client privilege. It revealed that former police chief Terry Timeus had initiated the investigation as a personal favor to his fishing buddy. And it disclosed the $600,000 settlement, one of the largest police misconduct settlements in Oregon history. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Within hours, the story was trending on social media. Local TV news picked it up. National outlets started calling. Portland residents were outraged. West Linn residents were shocked and embarrassed. The small town that prided itself on safety and trust had become synonymous with police corruption and racial injustice. The next day, February 11th, 2020, West Linn held a hastily organized town hall meeting. Community members packed the room. They demanded answers. They demanded accountability. City officials apologized. They admitted the investigation had been flawed. They promised reforms. But the damage was done. The Oregonian article changed everything. Once the story went public, state and federal authorities could no longer ignore what had happened. The Oregon Department of Justice announced it would review the case. The Clackamas County District Attorney's Office launched its own investigation, and what they found was even worse than the initial allegations. In May 2020, Clackamas County District Attorney John Foote released a scathing report on the Fesser investigation. The report documented a troubling pattern of deceit by omission by Detective Tony Reeves and former police chief Terry Timeus. The DA found that Reeves had intentionally deleted exculpatory and impeachment evidence in the form of the racist text messages. He'd unlawfully recorded statements during surveillance without consent. He'd seized legally privileged documents and given them to Benson. He'd failed to document that Benson feared Fesser would file a discrimination suit. He'd failed to document Timeus's personal relationship with Benson. The DA's conclusion was damning. The weight of the evidence is that these omissions were not merely negligent, inadvertent, or due to lack of experience. The effect was to mislead, as a reasonable investigator would be aware that this information is relevant and material. District Attorney Foote announced that his office would never call Tony Reeves as a witness in any future case. This is what's known as a Brady designation, named after the Supreme Court case Brady versus Maryland. When a prosecutor determines that an officer has credibility problems, they're required to disclose that to defense attorneys, which effectively ends that officer's ability to testify in court. For a detective, that's a career death sentence. The DA's report also found that Police Chief Terry Timeus had been complicit in the violations. He'd known about and approved the seizure of Fesser's privileged legal documents. He'd initiated a criminal investigation based on a personal relationship with no evidence. He'd colluded with Reeves and Benson throughout the process. His failure of leadership, the DA wrote, had created a culture that allowed this to happen. On June 2020, the city of West Linn fired Tony Reeves. His termination letter called his conduct disgraceful and unethical. After the firing, Reeves tried to defend himself. His attorney argued that Reeves had been following orders from Chief Timeus, that he'd believed there was probable cause to arrest Fesser, and that he'd deleted the text messages without nefarious intent. But nobody was buying it. The evidence was too clear. The text messages spoke for themselves. But the story still wasn't over, because in Oregon, being fired from one police department doesn't necessarily mean you can't work as a cop somewhere else. Officers who get terminated sometimes just move to another jurisdiction and get hired again. That's why police certification exists. It's issued by the state and allows someone to work as a law enforcement officer anywhere in Oregon. To truly end someone's career in policing, you have to revoke their certification. In May 2021, the Oregon Department of Public Safety Standards and Training, the state agency responsible for police certification, convened a hearing to determine whether Tony Reeves and Terry Timeus should lose their certifications permanently. The evidence was presented again: the racist text messages, the illegal surveillance, the conspiracy to arrest Fesser, the violation of attorney-client privilege, the district attorney's findings of dishonesty. The Police Policy Committee reviewed everything and made a recommendation to the full board. Both Reeves and Timeus should have their certifications permanently revoked for life. On July 22, 2021, the full board on public safety standards and training held a vote. The board members had read the reports. They'd reviewed the evidence. They'd heard testimony. The vote was unanimous. Former Police Chief Terry Timeus, police certification permanently revoked for life. Former Sergeant Tony Reeves, police certification permanently revoked for life. The charges: dishonesty, discriminatory behavior, and conduct that discredited the entire law enforcement profession. The board's written decision stated that Timeus's actions in initiating a criminal investigation as a personal favor, with no evidence and outside his jurisdiction, had brought immeasurable harm to public trust in policing. It found that Reeves's deletion of evidence, his tolerance of racist messages, and his explicit strategy to arrest Fesser before he could file a discrimination complaint constituted moral unfitness for the profession. Neither man would ever wear a badge again. Not in Oregon, not anywhere. Their law enforcement careers were over forever. So where are the players in this story today? Michael Fesser received a total of $15,000 in settlements. $415,000 from Eric Benson and A&B Towing, and $600,000 from the city of West Linn. He's rebuilt his life and his reputation. He's become an advocate for police accountability and racial justice reform in Oregon, consulting with agencies on how to prevent exactly the kind of abuse he experienced. Eric Benson paid his settlement and largely disappeared from public view. His reputation in the towing industry was destroyed. The status of A&B Towing today is unclear. Former Police Chief Terry Timeus is living in retirement, permanently barred from ever working in law enforcement again. He had retired in November 2017 with a $123,000 separation agreement just months after the Fesser arrest and shortly before the truth came out. Former Sergeant Tony Reeves is also permanently barred from law enforcement. He fought his termination and the revocation of his certification, but lost every appeal. His career is over, his reputation destroyed. Detective Mike Stradley, who assisted in the investigation, faced criminal charges for official misconduct. In July 2022, he was sentenced to probation and mandatory diversity training. His law enforcement career also ended. The city of West Linn implemented comprehensive police reforms, including mandatory outside investigations for any claims against department heads, enhanced oversight of cross-jurisdiction cases, and new protocols for documenting all aspects of criminal investigations. The reforms came too late for Michael Fesser, but they may prevent the next person from experiencing the same injustice. There are critical lessons from Michael Fesser's story that everyone needs to understand. First, document everything. Fesser complained about racism multiple times. He consulted an attorney. He kept records. When the retaliation came, he had a paper trail that proved his case. Second, attorney-client privilege is sacred for a reason. The fact that police seized and shared Fesser's private legal correspondence was one of the most shocking violations in this entire case. If you're consulting with a lawyer, those communications are protected, and any law enforcement officer who violates that is crossing a line that can end their career. Third, digital evidence is forever. Detective Reeves thought he could delete the racist text messages from his phone and make them disappear, but those messages were still on Eric Benson's phone, and they became the smoking gun that exposed the entire conspiracy. In the digital age, assume that anything you write, text, or email can and will be recovered. Fourth, personal relationships between police and civilians create corruption risks. The friendship between Terry Timeus and Eric Benson was the root cause of everything that happened. When a police chief values loyalty to a friend over loyalty to the law, the entire justice system breaks down. Fifth, internal police investigations often fail. West Linn's cursory internal review found only minor policy violations and resulted in a written reprimand. It took outside prosecutors, media investigations, and public pressure to expose the truth. That's why independent oversight matters. Finally, accountability is possible, but it takes time and persistence. From Fesser's arrest in February 2017 to the permanent revocation of certifications in July 2021, more than 4 years passed. Justice moved slowly, but Michael Fesser didn't give up, and eventually, the system delivered consequences. Not just a settlement, but permanent career-ending accountability for everyone involved.